They say a man's home is his castle. The real truth is simpler than that. It is the place where you are never a guest. The house on Caldwell Street had a wraparound porch I had built myself over 3 weekends in 1991. Using Douglas fir planks I had sanded by hand because the pre-finished ones looked cheap. The kitchen window above the sink looked out over the backyard oak that my late wife Diane had planted from a sapling the year we moved in. That tree was now 40 feet tall. My son-in-law had no idea what I had already set in motion that morning before he opened his mouth. Welcome back to Channel, where quiet choices make the loudest statements. If you've ever been made to feel like a stranger in the place you built with your own hands, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My full name is Raymond Earl Calder. I was 64 years old in the spring when everything on Caldwell Street came to a head, and I had lived in that house in Denton, Ohio for 31 years. I had worked for 20 of those years as a licensed civil engineer, first with the County Public Works Department, and then, from 2001 onward, with a private infrastructure firm called Marsh & Ellison on Commerce Boulevard. I retired at 62, 2 years before the events of this story, after Diane died. Diane Marie Calder had been my wife for 33 years. She passed on a Thursday morning in October from a stroke that came without warning. She had been drinking her coffee at the kitchen table on Caldwell Street and was gone before the ambulance arrived. After she died, I kept the house exactly as it was for 4 months. I did not move her coffee mug from the shelf above the machine. Then one morning I put it in the cabinet with the others, and that was the end of the 4 months. My daughter Renata was 36 years old. She had married a man named Troy Bassett in 2016, and they had 2 children, a boy of 5 and a girl of 3. Troy worked in commercial real estate sales, and he was good at the parts of his job that required confidence in a room full of people. He was less good at the parts that required careful attention to how things actually worked. Renata and Troy had lived in a rental apartment on the far side of Denton since they married. When Diane died and I was alone in a 4-bedroom house, Renata asked if she and Troy and the children could move in temporarily while they saved for a down payment. The word she used was temporarily. I said yes without conditions because they were my family and because the house was too quiet and because Diane would have said yes. That was in January of the year before this story begins. The house on Caldwell Street was built in 1963. A 2-story colonial on a 1/4 acre with a detached garage and a side garden that Diane had tended every spring and summer for 25 years. I had bought it in 1992 for $112,000, paid it off in 2009, and put every improvement into it myself or by hiring contractors I had vetted personally. I replaced the roof in 2004 with architectural shingles rated for 40 years. I had the foundation waterproofed in 2011 after a wet spring. I installed a new HVAC system in 2018 at a cost of $11,000, and I had done the ductwork inspection myself the following spring. The house was mine. The deed was in my name. It had been in my name since the day of purchase, and after Diane died it remained solely in my name. I kept a copy of the deed in a fireproof lockbox on the shelf in my home office closet on Caldwell Street, alongside the property tax receipts going back to 1992. The lockbox was a gray metal case with a combination lock. It had been on that shelf for 22 years. The first sign that something had shifted in how Troy thought about the living arrangement came in March of the 2nd year. The kitchen that morning smelled of burnt toast and the particular sharp smell of the cleaning spray Renata used on the counters, a lemon scent that was different from the one Diane had used. The children were at the table. Troy was standing at the counter with his phone. "I was talking to my colleague," Troy said, without looking up. He knows a property attorney. "Says it might be worth getting the house appraised." I looked at the back of his head. "For what purpose?" "Planning," he said. "Long term. If we're going to be here, it makes sense to understand the asset." "It's my asset," I said. "I understand it." He glanced back at me briefly. "Of course," he said. "I just meant for planning purposes." I said nothing. I poured my coffee and went to the back porch and looked at Diane's oak tree, which was bare in March, and drank my coffee until the cold drove me in. I had paid the property taxes on the Caldwell Street house every year for 31 years, $640 per half year. Paid in April and September, never missed, always paid 2 weeks early. I kept every receipt. I had maintained home insurance without a lapse since 1992, currently with Harvest Mutual Insurance through an agent named Doug Fenwick on Route 9, and I paid the annual premium of $2,140 every November from my own account. I service a furnace every October myself, replacing filters and checking the heat exchanger, because that was what you did when you owned the thing and wanted it to last. The first named professional in this story is Patricia Moreland, a real property attorney with offices on the fourth floor of the Denton Civic Building on Archer Street. I had first consulted Patricia Moreland in February of the second year, February 14th, at 10 a.m., 2 weeks after Troy's comment about the appraisal, because I wanted to understand my position fully before anything developed further. Patricia Moreland reviewed the deed and the property history and confirmed, at 10:47 a.m. on February 14th, that the house was solely and unencumbered in my name, with no easements, liens, or encumbrances, and that no adverse possession claim could be established in less than 21 years of exclusive occupancy under Ohio law. I thanked her, shook her hand, and drove home on Archer Street. Something in my chest settled on that drive, the way a structure settles when it has been properly checked and found sound. I began keeping a written record that same week. A small notebook, black cover, which I kept in the drawer of my home office desk, rather than in the lockbox. Every conversation that touched on the house, I wrote down the date, the time, who said what. The notebook had 41 entries in it by the time things ended. The escalation moved in 3 phases between March and the Saturday in June when Troy told me to pack my bags. The first phase was the appraisal. Troy hired a real estate appraiser named Kurt Sievers without asking me. I found out when Kurt Sievers appeared at the front door on a Tuesday morning in April at 9:30 with a clipboard and a measuring tool and introduced himself as being there for the scheduled visit. The morning light to the front door was the flat white of an overcast April sky. The hallway smelled of the wood floor wax I had applied the previous weekend. "There's no scheduled visit," I said. Kurt Sievers looked at his clipboard. "I have it down as confirmed with the homeowner." I looked at him. "I am the homeowner." He went pale in the particular way of someone who has just understood they are in the middle of something that has nothing to do with them. He apologized and left. I wrote the time in my notebook, 9:34 a.m., April 8th. Troy came home at 6:15 that evening. The kitchen had the smell of the dinner I had made. Chicken and rice, the recipe Diane had used every other week for years. Renata was at the table with the children. Troy came to the back door and looked at me, and I could see in his face that he had already heard. "I should have mentioned the appraisal," he said. "You should have asked," I said. "It's just for our records," he said. "For planning." "This is my house," I said. "Nothing happens here that I haven't authorized." He nodded. Renata looked at the table. The children ate their rice. I said nothing more. I served dessert and cleared the dishes and went to my office and added the entry to the notebook. The second phase began in May. Troy started referring to the house as our place in conversations I was not always part of but sometimes overheard. He said it to his mother on the phone on a Sunday afternoon. I heard him through the door of the study, which was open. He said it to a colleague he brought by the house one evening. "This is our place. We've been doing it up." He had, in fact, painted the hallway a color Renata had chosen, without asking me, on a Saturday when I was visiting my sister. Something in me noticed each of these things and filed them away, the way you notice a hairline crack in a load-bearing wall. And do not panic, but do not forget. The third phase arrived in early June, when Troy had a conversation with me in the backyard on a Thursday evening at 7:22 p.m. The garden was in its early summer state. The roses Diane had planted along the back fence were just opening, deep red, and the air had the particular warmth that arrives in Denton in the first weeks of June and makes the evenings feel very long. Troy sat down across from me on the porch. He had a beer in a manner that said he had been thinking about this for a while. "I want to talk about the long-term arrangement," he said. "All right," I said. "Renata and I have been here 18 months, he said. "We've contributed to the household. The kids are settled in school. We think it makes sense to formalize things." "Formalize how?" I said. "A co-ownership arrangement," he said. "We add our names to the deed. You retain your share. It's common in these situations." My throat tightened. I looked at the roses along the back fence. which Diane had planted in 2007 from bare root canes she had ordered from a nursery in Pennsylvania. No, I said. Troy's expression did not change immediately. Dad, Raymond, it's not about taking anything from you. It's about security. For the kids. For Renata. The house is mine, I said. It will go to Renata through my estate. That's what a will is for. Wills can be contested, he said. Contested, changed, whatever. We need something more concrete. I said nothing. I let the evening air sit between us for a moment. I'll think about it, I said. That was not true. But I needed time, not an argument. Troy accepted that for 2 weeks. Then he came back. This second conversation was on a Saturday morning in mid-June at 9:10 a.m. in the kitchen. Renata was upstairs with the children. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the slightly stale warmth of the house on a June morning with the windows not yet open. I've had an attorney look at it, Troy said. He set a folder on the table. A co-tenancy agreement. Simple and fair. I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I spoke with my own attorney. I said, I'll handle my own affairs. Your attorney. He said it with a particular flatness. When did you speak with an attorney? February, I said. That surprised him. I could see in the way his face reconfigured, very briefly, before settling back into its managed expression. We've been contributing to this household, he said. Groceries, utilities, renovations. That count for something. I had paid the property taxes every April and September for 31 years, $2,140 in annual insurance premiums, $11,000 for the HVAC system, and $8,000 for the roof inspection and partial reflashing I had done in 2020. Work I had contracted through Pete Garza at Garza Roofing on Industrial Way, whose permit was on file with the county. It counts as being a guest in someone else's home, I said, which is what you are. His face went flat. The kind of flat that has something behind it. That's not a generous way to look at it, he said. It's an accurate way, I said. I said nothing after that. I picked up my coffee and went to the back porch. The third conversation happened on a Saturday in June, the one that ended with my bags. I had known it was coming. I had spent the previous 2 weeks making quiet preparations, which I will describe in the next act. But the conversation itself arrived faster than I had expected, and in front of more people than I had expected. Renata's sister Clara was visiting that Saturday, along with Clara's husband and their teenage son. It was early afternoon, around 1:15 p.m., and they were all in the living room. I had been in my office reviewing some paperwork. The living room smelled of the sandwiches Renata had made, turkey and the particular mustard she used, and the children were on the floor with their toys, and the adults were talking about something I had not been following. Troy appeared in the doorway of my office. Can I have a word? He said. I came to the doorway. We've decided, he said, loud enough that the room could hear, that it would be better for everyone if you found your own place. The kids need stability. The house is too crowded. And since we've been contributing, we think we have a right to the space. Something in me went absolutely level, not cold, not still in the old way, level, like a spirit measure that has found its plane. This is your house now, he said. We're the ones building a life here. You're a guest at this point, and guests know when it's time to leave. Clara's husband made a sound from the living room. The room had gone very quiet. I looked at Troy for exactly one breath. I'll pack a bag, I said. I said nothing else. I went to my bedroom, packed one bag, put my coat on, and walked to my car. I drove to my sister Margaret's house on Fairview Drive, 7 minutes away, where I had arranged to stay 2 days earlier, and I arrived at 1:47 p.m. The second-named professional in this story is Kevin Marsh, a licensed civil process server with Denton County Civil Services on Broad Street. I had called Kevin Marsh on the Thursday before that Saturday, June 19th, at 8:30 a.m., and given him specific instructions. Kevin Marsh had confirmed those instructions and told me he would be ready when I gave him the word. That evening, from Margaret's kitchen table, I picked up my phone at 7:04 p.m. and sent Kevin Marsh one word: ready. I had already filed the paperwork that morning, before Troy said a word. I had been sitting in my home office on Caldwell Street at 6:47 a.m. on the Thursday, before the Saturday confrontation. in the particular early morning light that came through the east-facing window of that room and put a long, pale rectangle on the floor between my desk and the door. The lockbox was on the desk in front of me. I had taken it from the closet shelf the night before and left it there. I knew what was inside it. I did not need to open it to remember. I had been thinking about this for 6 weeks, since the Saturday morning conversation about the co-tenancy agreement, and what I had arrived at, sitting alone in that office on a Thursday morning in June, was not a complicated conclusion. It was actually a very simple one. The house was mine. It had been mine for 31 years. No conversation, no pressure, no folder left on a kitchen table could change what the deed said. The deed said Raymond Earl Calder. It had said that since June of 1992, what Troy did not understand, and what I had come to understand fully in the 6 weeks since his first co-tenancy proposal, was that ownership is not negotiated. It is documented. It exists in the paperwork that preceded the conversation and will outlast the conversation and does not require the other person's agreement to be true. I thought about Diane. She had sat at the kitchen table of this house on 31 years of Thursday mornings. She had planted the roses along the back fence and the oak tree in the backyard and the window boxes on the second floor that I still filled every spring with the same variety of geranium she had preferred. She had not left the house to Troy. She had not left it to anyone. The house was mine, and after me it would be Renata's, and that was how it was supposed to work. I thought about the children, the boy and the girl, 5 and 3 years old. They had done nothing. Whatever happened between me and Troy was not their fault and was not going to be punished. I had already spoken with Patricia Moreland about how to structure the outcome so that the children's lives were disrupted as little as possible. What I had decided to do was a 2-part action. Part 1 was already done as of that morning. Part 2 required only that I wait. Part 1. On Wednesday, June 18th, at 9:15 a.m., I had gone to the offices of Patricia Moreland on the 4th floor of the Denton Civic Building on Archer Street and signed a formal notice of revocation of license to occupy. Patricia Moreland had filed the document with the Denton County Court of Common Pleas at 11:03 a.m. the same day. The document formally established that Troy and Renata Bassett's right to occupy the property at 14 Caldwell Street, Denton, Ohio was revocable at the will of the owner, had always been revocable, and that a formal notice to vacate would follow within 30 days. The document had been signed, witnessed, and filed before Troy opened his mouth on Saturday afternoon. Part 2 was a process server. I thought about the notebook in the desk drawer. 41 entries covering 14 months of conversations about appraisals, co-tenancies, contributions, and rights. The notebook was not the legal instrument. The deed was the legal instrument, but the notebook was a record of how we had arrived here, and I had found it useful to have a record of how things arrived somewhere. I made one more call that morning at 8:45 a.m. before I went to the courthouse. I called my attorney, Patricia Moreland, to confirm the filing sequence. She confirmed it. I thanked her and put my phone in my pocket and drove to Archer Street through the early morning streets of Denton, which were still empty in the way they are empty in June before 7:30, when the school year is over and the children are still asleep. Something shifted in my chest on that drive. Not satisfaction, not relief exactly, more like the feeling of a weight that has been correctly distributed. The kind of balance that requires no adjustment because the math is right. I continued to pay the home insurance premium from my own account through that period. The annual renewal fell on November 7th, and I paid it on October 25th, early, from the same account I had always used. I continued to service the furnace in October. I filled the window boxes with Diane's geraniums in the last week of May, as I had every spring, because the house still looked like her house, and I intended it to continue to do so. Troy did not know about the filing. He did not know about the process server. He did not know about the notebook. He did not know about the conversation with Patricia Moreland in February, nor the return visit in June, nor the document that had been entered into the Denton County Court record at 11:03 a.m. on Wednesday morning. He knew only that he had made his move on Saturday afternoon in front of witnesses, and that I had picked up my coat and left. He took that as a conclusion. I spent Saturday evening at Margaret's house on Fairview Drive, where the kitchen smelled of the rosemary chicken she had made, in particular dry warmth of a house that has been heated all day in early summer. Margaret is 3 years older than me and has lived alone since her husband passed in 2019, and she knew enough about what was happening to say very little and make the bed in the spare room and leave a clean towel on the dresser. At 7:04 p.m., I sent Kevin Marsh's word. Sunday was quiet. I sat in Margaret's backyard in the morning and drank my coffee and watched her bird feeder. Troy sent me a text message at 10:22 a.m. Sunday morning that said, "We're sorry it came to this, but I think it's for the best. Take your time getting the rest of your things." I read it once and put the phone face down on the arm of the lawn chair. I said nothing. Renata called at 2:15 p.m. Her voice was careful in the way of someone walking a line between two things. "Dad," she said, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm at Margaret's." "I'm sorry about how Troy handled it," she said. "I know," I said. He thinks we need security for the kids." "I understand what he thinks," I said. "We'll talk soon." She paused. "Is there something happening that I should know about?" Something in my chest moved, a quiet anticipation, like the moment before a gear engages. "There will be," I said, "soon." She did not ask more than that. Monday came. At 9:14 a.m. on Monday, June 23rd, Kevin Marsh, licensed civil process server, Denton County Civil Services, Broad Street, arrived at the front door of 14 Caldwell Street and served Troy Bassett with a formal notice to vacate, accompanied by a certified copy of the notice of revocation of license to occupy filed with the Denton County Court of Common Pleas at 11:03 a.m. on June 18th, and a 30-day notice to quit the premises, signed by the owner of record, Raymond Earl Calder. I was not present. I did not need to be. Kevin Marsh called me at 9:31 a.m. to confirm service had been completed. I thanked him and wrote the time in my notebook. The third named professional was Patricia Merland, already named. Let me correct this. The third distinct professional action was executed by a family law mediator named Susan Holt, a certified mediator with the Ohio State Bar's ADR Division, whose office was on the second floor of the Millbrook Professional Building on Grant Avenue in Denton. I had engaged Susan Holt on June 20th, the Friday before the Monday service, at 3 p.m., to prepare a mediation framework for the property transition that would prioritize the children's schooling schedule and minimize disruption to Renata and the grandchildren. I had not engaged Susan Holt to help Troy. I had engaged her because Diane would have wanted the grandchildren handled carefully. Troy's response to the notice came through his own attorney on Tuesday, June 24th, at 11:45 a.m. His attorney was a man named Gary Voss with a downtown office. The letter was 2 pages and made 3 arguments. First, that an implied tenancy had been established through 18 months of occupancy and contribution. Second, that the notice to vacate was retaliatory. Third, that Troy's contributions to the property constituted an equitable interest. Patricia Moreland reviewed the letter that afternoon and called me at 4:30 p.m. The implied tenancy argument has no merit given that your ownership was never in question and no rental agreement was executed, she said. The retaliation argument is inapplicable. You are the property owner exercising your legal right. The equitable interest argument based on voluntary household contributions is not viable under Ohio law without a written agreement. My throat was clear. My hands were steady on the desk. What's our timeline? I said, if he doesn't vacate within 30 days of service, she said, we file for eviction. Standard proceeding. You'll have possession by late August at the outside. And the mediation? I said, that runs parallel. She said, Susan Holt's framework can be incorporated into any agreement about the children's transition. That's completely separate from the property matter. I thanked her, closed a notebook, and went to make dinner. Troy's behavior through that week was the behavior of a man who had made a calculation and was waiting for it to resolve in his favor. He sent 2 more text messages, one on Tuesday evening asking if we could talk like adults, one on Wednesday morning asking if I had spoken with Renata. I did not respond to either. I did not respond because there was nothing to say that was not already in the document Kevin Marsh had placed in his hands at 9:14 on Monday morning. Something in my stomach dropped slightly on Wednesday evening, not from doubt, but from particular weight of understanding that a relationship, specifically the relationship between me and Troy, was not going to recover from this. That was not a loss I had chosen, but it was a consequence I had accepted. The meeting happened on Friday, June 27th, at 10 a.m. in Patricia Moreland's office on the fourth floor of the Denton Civic Building on Archer Street. Troy came with Gary Voss. I came with Patricia Moreland and the lockbox. The office had a window that faced the Civic Plaza below, where the fountain was running in the June heat. The room smelled of the particular neutral air of a professional office. No coffee, no cleaning product, just the dry cool of the air conditioning and the faint smell of paper. Patricia Moreland's desk was clear except for 2 folders and a yellow legal pad. Gary Voss set his briefcase on the table and opened it. He had prepared an amended proposal, a revised co-tenancy agreement with a 10% equity share for Troy and Renata, structured as compensation for household contributions. He placed it on the table. Troy looked at me. I placed the lockbox on the table. I opened it. Inside was the original deed to 14 Caldwell Street, dated June 11, 1992, bearing the name Raymond Earl Calder as sole owner. Beside it were 31 years of property tax receipts, filed chronologically in a rubber-banded bundle. Beside that was a certified copy of the notice of revocation filed June 18th. Beside that was a 41-entry notebook, which I did not open. I placed only the deed in front of Gary Voss. I said nothing. Patricia Moreland spoke. The property at 14 Caldwell Street has been in my client's sole ownership since 1992. No rental agreement was ever executed. No equity agreement was ever signed. No written contribution arrangement exists. The proposed co-tenancy agreement has no legal foundation. The notice to vacate stands. 30 days from June 23rd. Gary Voss read the deed. He turned it over. He set it down. Troy's hands were flat on the table. His face had gone the color of the pale Civic Plaza outside the window. You did all this, he said, before Saturday. The filing was June 18th. I said, Wednesday morning. He looked at the certified copy. The timestamp at the top read 11:03 a.m., June 18th, 2025. 2 days before he told me I was a guest in my own house. I said nothing more. I let that number sit in the room. Gary Voss leaned toward Troy and spoke in a low voice. Troy listened. His jaw was set, but his hands had not moved from their position on the table. My client would like to discuss a transition timeline. Gary Voss said, that takes into account the children's school enrollment. We have a mediator engaged for exactly that purpose, Patricia Moreland said. Susan Holt. My client arranged that on June 20th. Gary Voss looked up. Troy looked at me. Something moved through his face that I was not going to name. You've thought of everything, he said. I thought of the grandchildren, I said. That's all. I closed the lockbox, picked it up, thanked Patricia Moreland, and walked to the elevator. I drove back to Margaret's house on Fairview Drive with the windows down and the radio off, and arrived at 11:14 a.m. The sun was on the front of Margaret's house, and her roses were open, the same deep red as Diane's roses along the back fence on Caldwell Street. Troy and Renata vacated 14 Caldwell Street on July 21st, 2025, 2 days before the 30-day deadline. They moved into a rental apartment on the east side of Denton, a 2-bedroom unit 3 blocks from the children's school. Susan Holt's mediation framework had established a visitation and custody transition schedule for the grandchildren that allowed them to continue seeing me on weekends at Caldwell Street, which was the only thing I had insisted on. I returned to the house on the afternoon of July 21st, after they had taken the last of their things. Renata had left the kitchen in good order. Troy had left without speaking to me. I unlocked the front door, set the lockbox on the kitchen table, and walked through every room. The hallway was the color Renata had chosen, a pale gray-green. That was not what I would have chosen, but that I found I did not mind. The children's rooms were empty. The window boxes on the second floor still had Diane's geraniums in them, which I had filled in May. I went to the back porch and looked at the oak tree in the backyard. It was July and it was full, and it moved slightly in the early afternoon air. I sat there for a long time. There's a difference between what you own and what you hold. Most people confuse the two. They believe that presence is ownership, that contribution is equity, that the longer you occupy a space, the more the space becomes yours. But ownership is a document. It has a date. It has a name. It is not renegotiated by comfort or convenience or the passage of time. I had not kept 31 years of property tax receipts because I was suspicious. I had kept them because keeping records is what careful people do with things that matter. Raymond Earl Calder, 64 years old, and still the only name on the deed of 14, Caldwell Street, Denton, Ohio. I sat on the back porch of my own house that July afternoon and listened to the oak tree move in the wind, the same wind that had moved through that backyard every summer for 31 years. What would you have done, standing in that attorney's office on the morning of June 27th, watching your son-in-law look at the timestamp on a document filed 2 days before he told you to leave? Drop a comment and let me know. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.